Hey everyone, so today we are going to be working on our sampler bouquet block number 7. So here's the block in question. It's super cute. I'm very pleased with the way this one turned out. Got a bunch of beautiful bright pink in here, got some detailing going on. Love, love, love this block. So this one's a little bit of a funky monkey. So let's talk about fabric and then let's talk about other supplies I'm going to recommend you have on hand. So if you have your instructions on you, you have the option, of course, to do one layout with on point, so you would do one block at a time, or you have the option to do 4 blocks at a time for the 4-patch layout, or if you're doing both, you're going to make 5 in total. Here are the finished sizes of each block, so you're going to have a 5-inch or an 8-inch, and these are the actual file sizes. So let's flip over. And let's take a quick gander at our fabrics needed. So you can tell in the layout up here, we're going to have fabric 1 in 3 different places, which is always our background. We're going to have fabric 2 in 3 different places, which we have chosen to be our green. And then we're going to have fabric 4 right here, which for me is my pink. So according to your instructions and your fabric supply list, you're just going to want to defer to that. So let's look here down at our cut list. So we have fabric 1, 2, 4, and of course your optional backing and your optional piece of wool. So let's first begin with just the fabric. So fabric 1, you are going to need one piece of 4.5 by 4.5, and you're going to cut it on the angle into a half square triangle and one 9 by 9 square. If you're doing the 8-inch, if you're doing the 5, it's the one on top. So of course I've got my big square, but then I've also taken a square and I have cut it in half on the angle. Sometimes with these, I'll cut these about a 1/2 inch bigger. So a lot of times, like if it's a 4.5 block, I'll cut it to like a 5.5 inch block, just for the sake of making sure everything is covered. So just throwing that out there, I do like to cut mine a little bigger if I'm cutting them into half or quarter square triangles. So that's what you're going to need for fabric 1. Fabric 2, down here, you're going to need, depending on the size, you're going to need again to cut into a half square triangle. So you're going to need one piece at either 1.5 inches by 5 or 1.25 inches by 3.5, depending on the size you're doing. And then you're going to need one square. Again, a lot of times I do cut mine a bit larger. So I have my stem here for my flower. And then I've got my 2 half square triangles. So I again just had a bigger square and I cut it in half on the angle. The last piece of fabric you're going to need is your fabric 4, which is just the applique for your big flower right here. So just a nice big square, and again, depending on what size you're doing for the 5-inch or for the 8-inch, be sure you were watching that. And again, I always enjoy that they have like a spot for you to put a swatch, especially if you're doing more than just the recommended fabrics by the yardage that you choose in the beginning. So obviously, if you're going to do the optional back, you will need a square according to the size cut. And then you are also going to cut, if you're doing the optional wool, or if you're like me, and instead of using battleizer, you are using a no-show mesh and a piece of batting, you would cut it to the size of the optional wool. But instead of cutting mine 7 3/4 by 7 3/4, I always cut mine 8, just give me a little bit of allowance. Same thing with the 4 7/8 by 4 7/8 on the 5-inch. I would have cut that 5, but that's just me. Now, if you're using the battleizer, you're going to cut a piece of battleizer large enough to fit the hoop, depending on the block side that you are using. Now, if you were doing the 4 patch, you're basically just going to quadruple everything, as you can see here. So depending on what layout you're doing, you're going to cut either one piece per block or you're going to quadruple it for the 4. Those are going to be listed out for you in your instructions based off your hoop size. Also, if you're doing the optional backing, you're going to want to have some Vanish light thread on hand, probably some extra bobbins, maybe empty if you're going to wind them to match the colors that you're using on the top. We'll talk about that later. So let's move this to the side and let's talk about some other things you're going to need. As always, you're going to need your threads. So for the green detailing, I have chosen Exquisite Thread color number ES951. For my pink, I have chosen ES3 25. For the yellow, I have chosen 736, ES 736. As always, my quilting color is ES 165, and the purple that I've been using through the entire thing is ES 392. So these have been my mainstay colors through the whole project. Another thing I would recommend having on hand, of course, is your embroidery tape and a decent pair of scissors to trim with. So I have been using these duckbill curved applique scissors and the embroidery tape to hold my edges down. If you normally don't use embroidery tape, you are going to definitely want it for this block. There's a weird little step that just trust me, you'll want it. I also have a cutting mat here. It's a rotating one. It's 12 by 12. You don't need a rotating mat, but know that you should have a cutting mat on hand and a ruler to trim with and a rotary cutter, of course. Another thing I'd also recommend having if you don't have a lot of dexterity, and just because when they want you to finger press this thing here in a minute, it's a little bit, you need it to be very crisp. So I've got my handy dandy rolling press on hand. So if you have a wood iron or a rolling press, I'd go ahead and have that handy on you. So I'm going to move my threads and my fabrics over to the machine. So bear with me for just a second as I gather all my things so we can begin sewing today. Again, we are working on block number 7. I already have a piece of no-show mesh stabilizer hooped. I have my design loaded, and I have ES 165 in my needle. So bear with me as I kind of pivot over here and we get started. So we're going to start on this screen here on the Avenir. You can see the design size. I'm doing the 8-inch block. It's going to be 10,793 stitches, a total of 19 steps, and it's going to take about 18 minutes at the speed setting that I am currently set to. So if you're beginning with the battleizer and you would like to go ahead and hoop that, get that taken care of. If you're doing like me and you're using your leftover 100% cotton or cotton poly blend battings, then you're going to want to have a piece of no-show mesh hooped just like I have here. If you are using the optional water-soluble thread, so I like Vanish Light for water-soluble, so I'm going to probably refer to it in the video as Vanish Light. Just to know that if I say Vanish Light, I mean water-soluble thread. I have a 9014 embroidery needle in. I like that for thicker projects. But if you are wanting to do the optional Vanish Light, you're going to want to put it in for machine stitch step 1. So if you're doing the battleizer, the no-show mesh, whatever, you're going to sew machine stitch step 1 directly on whatever you have chosen to hoop as your batting or stabilizer. And no matter what, you're going to have regular thread in your bobbin, regular embroidery bobbin thread. For me, it's a 60 weight. For some people, it might be a 90 weight. Just use whatever the brand manufacturer recommends you use in your machine. Now we're going to take our piece of batting and we are going to encompass the outside stitches. Again, if you're using optional wool, you're going to go ahead and do it here as well. If you are not using the optional wool and you are like me and you are doing the cotton poly or the 100% cotton batting in place of the battleizer, you are going to go ahead and you can go back in stitch step 1, or if you're doing the optional wool, I would recommend doing machine stitch step 2, especially if you're doing the battleizer, because it is going to do a heavier zigzag stitch and it's going to hold it down. If you are doing the optional Vanish Light, you're going to want to go ahead and leave that in your needle. For me, I prefer to go back and repeat machine stitch step 1 just because it isn't as a heavy stitch. If you did machine stitch step 2 and you're using my method, it's not going to matter at the grand scheme of things. It's just going to be a thicker stitch. And the only issue I have with it is that sometimes it puckers up here in the top corner where they meet. They also recommend that if you're using the optional wool and the battleizer, so if you're using 2 layers of batting, they recommend that you do raise your embroidery foot height just to prevent puckering because you are going through a thickness. Now, I'm going to completely skip machine stitch step 2. I always skip step 2 unless I've just done it to show you guys. But I'm going to skip step 2 real quick. Let me get back to where I need to be. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim the batting close to the stitch line. So if you're doing the optional wool, or if you're using the same method that I am with stabilizer and batting, you are going to also trim close to the stitch line. So let's trim close to the stitch line right here. So let's just knock that off. Now, this is also a good opportunity to tell you that if you were using the water-soluble thread, you're going to want to go ahead and change back to a light-colored thread, whatever you are using for your flip and fold. So I always recommend using a color that is no darker than your background. I've got the ES 165 because it's a nice cream color. It matches the background batik that I'm using very nicely. So again, if you have not changed your thread yet, go ahead and do so now before you begin the next step. Now we're going to go ahead and sew machine stitch step 3. Machine stitch step 3 is just going to give you a rough outline of your initial fabric placements. So what I want you to go ahead and get on hand is your fabric 2, all of it, and your fabric 1 half square triangles that you've cut. So go ahead and grab those because that's what we're going to need for the lower half of the block. The upper half will come later. Perfect. So we are going to begin kind of just like paper piecing. We're going to always put our first fabric face side up. We are going to encompass this little stem that it has created for the flower. I want you to supersede beyond the batting, or if you're using battleizer, that's fine. Just supersede along the furthest line by a smidge so we can trim it down at the end and we have a little bit to hang over. The first time I did this, I didn't think about it and I had to take the stitching out and repeat the step. So just make sure all the stitches are covered and then sew machine stitch step 4, and that's all you're going to need to do to tack this piece down. And I am going to piece with ES 165 through the entirety of this. So all my flip and folds are going to be done with ES 165. Let's go ahead and pull that back, and we are going to trim roughly 1/4 inch away on these little 2 top angles. And down the 2 sides. Okay. But because these 2 little angles here at the bottom kind of extended, I'm not trimming anything there. So trim close, about 1/4 inch away around, then leave this on the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and return the hoop to the machine. And I'm going to get ready for doing the flip and fold for these 2 half square triangles. So we're going to start at the top one, so the one on the left side. We're going to take our piece of half square triangle fabric 1. We're going to lay the raw edges up to one another along the length of the angled piece, and we're going to hit start. We're going to sew machine stitch step 5. As soon as we sew machine stitch step 5 down, as always, we're going to flip and fold. If you have a fabric relaxant pin you would like to use, like a fabric folding pin, go ahead and put that on your stitch line to help you flip it over to make it a little smoother. And then if you want to use your roll and press, my little handy dandy roll and press, since I have it on me today, I am going to use it a little bit. It does make a little easier to push them down. So now that I have that one done, now I'm going to repeat the same process on the other side. So we're going to take this and we are going to take our other piece of fabric, 1 half square triangle, lay it even with our raw edges, and we are going to sew machine stitch step 5 to tack it down. Again, the important thing of leaving that 1/4 inch is so you have about 1/4 inch on your other piece, just like when you're quilt piecing, you have roughly 1/4 inch. Okay, so we're going to flip that on down. Now here I would recommend putting a couple of pieces of tape down and watching the fabric in the hoop because it's going to do kind of like a 3/4 of a box. So I'm going to pull the fabric tight and tape it smooth against the stabilizer because it is going to do a stitch from here up and around, and I don't want it to catch my fabrics. So I'm going to take these 2 pieces of tape off here in a second, but I'm also going to put a piece of tape here to hold that smooth, and I'm going to put a piece of tape here to hold that smooth. So just at the 2 top places, let me kind of scoot that out so you guys can see. So I've got 2 pieces of tape, just 1 on each side. You can use a bigger piece to cover both. But I want to hold this down because, like I said, the stitch is going to come up and over, and I don't want it to catch anything. So we're going to hit start, and that's going to sew machine stitch step 7. This block is not hard by any means, but it is a little different than what we've done in the past. See, it catches that right there. It did it to me last time, so I was like, use tape. It will hold it still. Okay, so now I'm going to pull this back. I'm going to leave the 2 pieces of outside tape, but I'm going to take off the 2 pieces of inside tape, and I'm going to trim. So I guess I am going to take that off. I didn't think I was. I'm just going to move it over. But I'm going to trim about 1/4 of an inch away here and about 1/4 of an inch away here. So that's just going to make those 2 sides smooth. Now let me get this back into place. And we are going to go ahead and move on to the next step. So now we're going to do our half square triangles in the fabric 2, so your last 2 pieces of it. You're going to want to have them on hand because they're going to go right here. So you're just going to lay it, again, even with the previous raw edge, flipping it down over top of the previous fabrics, and you're going to sew machine stitch step 8. Flip it up and kind of smooth it down nice and crisp. Then you're going to come over here and you're going to take your last piece of fabric 2. You are going to put it flush with the previous raw edge, and you're going to lay it over top of your previously tacked down pieces of fabric. We're going to sew machine stitch step 9, and that is going to tack it down for your flip and fold. Always make sure that you have a little bit of fabric that's going to supersede beyond the outside edge. So if you've got your batting or wool on top, you can see it more clearly. But if you have battleizer down, just make sure that you're having the fabric supersede beyond this line right here so you can trim it down at the end. If there's no fabric there, there's nothing to trim. So we're going to smooth this down. Just get it nice and smooth. And it is now going to sew a diagonal line all the way across. So again, I'm going to tape. So I'm going to put a piece of tape here on this outside corner just to hold it still. I'm going to slide my hoop out so you can see what else I'm doing. And I'm going to take another piece of tape and I'm going to kind of catch this edge right here and hold that down nice and smooth. And I'm going to watch this right here very clearly, but it's going to come this way, so I'm not really going to have to worry about this. I may have to worry about this, so just keep an eye on that as you go. Tape if you feel like you want to secure it a little better. So now we're going to go ahead and hit start and sew machine stitch step 10. And that is going to tack down both layers at the same time. Okay? Remove any tape you might need to trim. And then again, trimming roughly 1/4 of an inch away from the stitch line. Okay, so now here's for the kind of weird part through this block. So I'm going to move my block out of my hoop. I'm going to hit OK so my arm will move for me. We're going to take fabric number 1, the remaining piece, the big 9.5 inch square, or the 9 inch square, and we're going to lay it over top of our block. We're going to move it around until we kind of see where we're going to have some overhang all the way around our furthest sewn outside edge so we can trim. So we need a little bit of edge room. So I'm just kind of scooting it and moving it until I kind of see where I want it to be. So I know that I have overhang now all the way around, and you can kind of feel the line. If you don't feel the line, flip it back and make sure it's going to go at least 1/4 of an inch beyond all the edges. Scoot this over here just a little more. Good. So once you've got it roughly where you want it, now what you're going to do is you're going to take your fabric one and you're going to fold it up to where you've roughly cut that 1/4 of an inch. I know this is a little odd. So you're going to fold it right to this previous stitch line, the last line you stitched, right there. You're going to fold it up to that. And then you're going to, they say to finger press it, but I like to use the rolling press. It creates a nice crisp line that I can actually see when I go to cut this here in a second. So you're going to see what I'm talking about in just a minute. But get that nice and crisp, just so you can see the line. And then you are actually about to cut away here. So let's take the camera, let's move over to my cutting table. So bear with me as I reposition my camera where I know you guys can see what I'm doing. So I've got my ruler and my rotary cutter and my mat. So I am going to take the 1/4 of an inch line of my ruler. So right here on my line, this one right there where my finger is at, I'm going to take those lines and I'm going to put that right in that deep seam. And I am going to cut exactly 1/4 of an inch away. So bear with me. If you need to draw a line with like a heat removable or a water soluble pen, be my guest. I want you guys to be able to see where you're cutting. Okay. So I've got 1/4 of an inch. I've got that pulled back and I've cut this away. So this is just scrap. And I'm just going to throw it to the side because you might be able to use it later. So now we've got roughly 1/4 of an inch seam allowance left. And now we're going to come back over to the machine. So now what they want you to do is to kind of smooth this edge back out. So you can go iron that, or you can kind of try to roll it a little smooth again. So I don't want to go to my ironing station. It would probably be better if you did, just to get it nice and smooth without any folds. But we're doing a video, so we're not going to go through that. But I would recommend ironing that back smooth. So now we're going to take, and we're going to lay this newly cut edge, and we're going to put it even with the old cut edge. Well, not the old, but the cut edge of the green, I should say. You're going to try to get the fabrics flush with one another as best as you can, and you're going to just kind of hold it nice and smooth. Tape if you feel like you need to. And we're going to sew machine stitch step 11, which is going to tack this down. And it should roughly stitch right around where your previous crease line was. As long as you've got about 1/4 of an inch, you're good. Mine's not perfect, but it is relative, and that's all I need. Now we are going to take, let me move my camera. Now we're going to take and we're going to flip the white back. So now is where we are going to tape again. It is very imperative that you get this line nice and flat and crisp, okay? So you do want to smooth this line down very well. So make sure it is nice and smooth and then tape. Now, if you are doing the optional Vanish light thread, you're going to want to go ahead and put it in your needle now because we are about to do the basting stitch to hold the back on. So if you are also putting a back on this quilting as you go, you're going to want to take the hoop off the machine, flip it over, put your back down, covering the furthest most outside stitch lines, and you are going to want to tape it down. You're going to want to have, like I said again, if you want to use that, go ahead and put the Vanish light in your needle. It is going to baste all the way around, and it is also going to sew the outline stitch for your flower applique. So I'm not doing that. I'm leaving ES 165 in my needle, and I'm leaving my embroidery bobbin thread in my bobbin. But I digress. So go ahead and tack that down. Now, after this tacks down, we don't trim anything away because we want our outside edge to have some overhang, because we want to be able to trim at least 1/4 of an inch away all the way around the block when we are done. I prefer to trim these at 1/2. That's just me, but the pattern manufacturer recommends 1/4. Either is fine, guys. The reason I do 1/2 is because I feel like it's easier to press the seams open. For the putting the back on all at once, I feel like I can press them open a little smoother, and we'll cover that more when I get there, but I do an optional piece of batting additionally, and if you watch the getting started video, you'll see what I'm talking about. So if you haven't, I'd recommend watching the getting started video before you watch any videos, really. Okay, so now here's where we get into some rapid thread changes. So if you are doing the optional quilted back, you are going to really want to pay attention to your instructions. You are going to want to watch it for when you need to change your bobbin and how to change your bobbin. I know some of you are going to want to use the same color on your back all the way through. If that is the case, go ahead, have that bobbin wound, have it ready, go ahead and change it now. And you will leave it in till the duration of this is completed. For those of you that are changing back to back to back and to the different colors that you are also using on the top, you are going to want to have a bobbin wound out of ES 165. You're going to want to have a bobbin wound out of ES 325, ES 392, 951, and 763, or whatever your respective colors are for those. So let's talk about it. We're going to start with ES 763. That is our yellow. It's going to do the stamina of our flowers. So I'm going to put that in my needle. No matter what, you're putting that in your needle. And if you were doing this color on the bobbin, go ahead and change that. If you were using if you're using the same color on your back all the way through, go ahead and put in that color. If you are winding your own bobbins and you are doing it on the back side and changing the colors as you go, Hoop Sisters does recommend that you pull your bobbin thread to the top to prevent thread nesting. So again, if you're doing the optional back in between each step, please pull your bobbin thread up before you start the step to prevent thread nests. Now we're going to go ahead and stitch out machine stitch step 13. That is going to be the only time we use the yellow. And again, it's just going to be the stamina of our flower. I know you're probably thinking, but Emily, you don't have the pink fabric down yet. You're not supposed to. Don't worry about it. We're actually going to do all the decorative stuff in the stamina of the flower before we move on to that step. There's actually going to be another decorative stitch before we tack it down. So I promise, don't freak out. I did not forget the fabric. And this is machine stitch step 13. I don't know if I mentioned that, so I just want to make sure I did. So we're going to go ahead and change threads again. So this time I am going to be switching to purple, my ES 392. It is what I am going to sew. There's going to be kind of like a little bit of decorative little circles that they're going to do at the top of this. So I have chosen my purple for it. So if you are, oh my gosh, if you are switching your bobbin to the different colors as you go, you'll want to switch that to whatever color you have decided to be the decorative stitch at the top right here. So of course also you want to pull your bobbin thread up to the top before you begin machine stitch step 14, which is what we're about to do. And again, when I say all that, it's only for those of you that are doing the optional back, so keep that in mind. I think my thread just came up and out of my needle when it jumped, so bear with me. I'm going to have to rethread that real quick. Okay, there we go. All right, so we've done 392 right here. And now we're going to go ahead and we are finally going to applique down our piece of fabric number 4, which is our bright pink. Now, I'm leaving the purple in because I'm actually going to be using it for machine stitch step 16, which is going to sew a decorative stitch right in here. So if I did the detailing here, I'm going to do the detailing there. But I would recommend going ahead and putting in what color you want to do the decorative stitch through your flower. So if you have chosen a different color for that decorative stitch, then I would, and those are going to be showing in page 5, step 16 on your instructions if you want to look at the decorative stitch before you begin. But go ahead and put that color in your bobbin and in your needle. Again, only in your bobbin if you are doing the optional back. For those of you not doing the optional back, you are using you are not using exquisite. You are using regular embroidery bobbin throughout the entirety of the project. No changes. Cover all the stitches. And sew machine stitch step 15, which is going to tack down the pink fabric. And I believe it or not, we are almost getting to the end. This is done in a slightly different step than what we normally do, so I know this is just a smidge different than our normal stitch out, so just keep that in mind. And it's going to do a second run. It's just going to hold it down very well. So that's another reason if you are doing this, it's important to change your bobbin now or before you begin this step if you're doing the optional back. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this off the machine for just a second and I'm going to trim it while it's still in the hoop. And instead of doing the trimming 1/4 inch away, this is just a standard applique. This is not a flip and fold, just a regular old applique. So we are going to want to trim close to the stitch line. And you're going to want to pay a little extra special attention. You need something with a fine tip like this to really get into that little crevice. It does do a pretty heavy satin stitch. Don't worry about making it perfect, but you do want to get close as possible. And if you have any leftover larger pieces like this at the end after you've trimmed, just go back and redefine them. Alrighty, that's good enough for me. And we're going to slide that back on into the machine. I'm going to go ahead and hit start because this step takes a little bit, not super long, but this is machine stitch step 16. This is going to sew this super cute decorative stitch through the inside before it does the satin stitch actually. So again, I would have recommended using the same color we did machine stitch step 15 in if you were doing the optional back in your bobbin as well. But I also like to have that in my needle because I feel like it kind of lines up with one another very well. And I also see another piece of fabric I'm going to need to go redefine the trimming. So believe it or not, we are on 16. There's only 3 steps to go, and we are not even 4,000 stitches into the 10,000 plus stitch out. It's because the last step is very quick, but these next 2 steps are going to be the most time-consuming steps in total. Okay, so we're done with machine stitch step 16 now. So we're gonna want to go ahead and change our threads once again. So you're gonna want to put in your needle, whatever color you are wanting to be your satin stitch around fabric number 4. So I have a pink for my fabric 4. If you have a red, you'll want to put in a red thread, just whatever works for you. So I again am using Exquisite Thread color number ES325. So bear with me as I change my thread real quick. Also, if you are doing the optional back and you want the thread color to match the top, go ahead and have a bobbin placed in before you begin sewing, and go ahead and make sure that you have pulled the bobbin thread up to the top. And once again, if you are not doing the optional additional back where you're quilting it as you go, if you're doing like me and adding it at the end, all you need to do is have the regular embroidery bobbin in. No changes. So let's go ahead and thread that. And let's start. So this is machine stitch step 17. This is going to do a very heavy satin stitch all the way around the flower. This is going to be your most time consuming step throughout the duration of the project. If I'm not mistaken, I believe this step said it was going to take 7 minutes when I was looking at it on the machine earlier. So this one's going to take a little bit of time to sew out. But it's well worth it because it does do a very nice job. The detailing is absolutely beautiful. But this is kind of the most funky block we've ran into thus far. When I was reading it, I thought it wanted us to do a fold over like it did, I believe, back in block 3 or 4. Where we had to iron over 1/4 of an inch. That is not what it wants you to do. So pay special attention to this block as you work through it, because there are a few things that are a little funky that if you're not paying attention to your instructions, or if you're not following along with the video, that you will do wrong. Because the first one that I did, even reading the instructions, I still kind of goofed on and had to take some stitches out and replace the fabric and repeat steps. Not a whole throw block away situation, but just be careful with this one. This one, it's not hard, it's not bad, it's just different. It's something we're not used to. It's entirely different than the other blocks, so just keep that in mind. Ooh, my chair caught my cord and thought the iPad was going to go straight into the floor. That was not bueno. But you can see it does a really, really heavy traditional satin stitch for embroidery, because it does the run on the outside, the run on the inside. It's doing a very heavy zigzag underlay. Like, we've done a ton of stitches and we are just now about to get into the satin stitching. Crazy, right? Oh, shoot. I am determined to knock this camera off the counter today. I am so sorry if that hurt your eyes. So while we're letting that stitch out, let's just kind of look at some of the detailing in the block while we wait, because it's going to be a minute. So on the very last step is where we're going to put our green in. That is just going to want to be what runs this kind of triple stitch all the way around the block. This is the decorative stitch that I was talking about earlier, that it does through the center of the flower, that we chose to do in purple. It's a cute little stitch. Like I said, I did the tack down and I did the decorative stitch in the same color. That is what the pattern does recommend. And just because I wanted to put the color in there and incorporate it twice, we also did that here at the top. This is the only time I've used this yellow through this quilt, but I felt like for this one it really needed it. And that's where we've done that. I like that it did kind of like a tight little zigzag stitch as opposed to like a satin stitch or a run stitch to create that. And then you can see how nice and heavy the satin stitch around it is. Very traditional. I do appreciate their attention to detail with some of these decorative stitches, but I really, really like the you can't be a traditional heavy satin stitch. They're gorgeous. And of course the quilting is like we've done everything else. It's going to be those nice little tiny feathers. So we're getting to about halfway through the final part of our heavy satin stitch. We're getting there, guys. Believe it or not, like, this is going to be the majority of your stitches. This and the quilting are these two steps. If anybody is doing the optional back and you're changing the colors as you go, I would love, love, love to see what that looks like at the end. If you're doing class with us and you'd like to bring that in, I'd absolutely love to see what that looks like. And I know this part of the video is boring, so I'm just going to remain silent until we get up to here. If you guys want to skip forward until this stitching is done, where I record this as I'm sewing, I can't skip forward. But if you want to skip up till the end of this part, go right ahead, be my guest. Fantastic. So we are done with the longest step of this, and now we're going to go ahead and switch our color to our quilting color. So I'm going back to ES 165. So again, if you are using the optional back, you're going to want to go ahead and change your color. I don't know why I keep wanting to take my hoop off my machine, but I do. Every time I go to change my thread, I'm wanting to take the hoop off. But if you are using the optional back, you're going to want to go ahead and change your bobbin color if you're changing it as you go to the same color as what it's going to do the quilted feathers in. If you are like me and you are not doing the optional additional back, go ahead and just leave your bobbin alone. You don't change it at all. That's another reason I chose this, because I don't have to change my bobbin every time. But if you are doing the additional optional back and you are changing the colors as you go ahead and be sure to pull your bobbin thread up to the top before you actually start stitching, just to avoid a thread nest. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to hit start, and we're going to sew out machine stitch step 18. And I had a little loop around my needle, so I had this weird little tail. I want to go ahead and cut that off before it gets looped up in my other stuff. Okay. So we're on the second to the last step, and this is actually the second to the longest stitch of the design. This one's going to take 4 minutes versus 7 minutes, so it's not as bad. It's going to quilt both of the little sections down here on either side of the fabric stem, and then it's going to move up to the top block, and it's going to stitch all around the flower bud. It does not stitch through it. I absolutely love those micro feathers that it does through this. I'm a big sucker for a feather. I think they're just very classic. They're very traditional quilty. They're absolutely beautiful. Love everything about a good feather. It does go through the yellow quite a bit when it quilts. Not like an absolute ton, but it does go through it. So don't worry, you've not done anything wrong. It is supposed to do that. I know in a lot of these it doesn't kind of go through the decorative stitching, but it does on this one just a little bit. I think that's kind of why they chose that kind of like zigzag stitch, because you can't really tell when it's all said and done. Okay, so we are ready to change to our last color for this block. So go ahead and take off your cream and switch to whatever you have chosen as your color for your green, for your stem and your leaves. So I am using, again, Exquisite Thread color number ES951. If you are doing the additional optional back where you want to change the colors as you go ahead and load a bobbin in this color at this time as well. If you are not doing that, but you are still using the optional back, go ahead and leave the same color you've been using through the whole thing. And if you're like me and you're adding your back at the end, just leave your bobbin alone. Remember, you don't change it at all. So now we're going to go ahead and sew machine stitch step 19. As I stated before, is going to be the very last step of this block. And it just does a nice running bean stitch through the stem and the two leaves. This one goes very quickly, especially after you have done the last two steps that take like almost 70% of the block. But I do appreciate their attention to detail when the stitching in all these blocks. They do a really nice job. I want to do a Hoop Sister quilt for years now, and I'm glad we finally had the time and the opportunity and found something that we absolutely just loved. All right, so that is the end of machine stitch step 19. When you are all said and done, all you're going to do is take it over to your cutting table and trim all the way around. I have been trimming at a 1/2 inch, but again, like I said, they recommend a 1/4. I have only been doing a 1/2 because I feel like it's easier to press the seams open when I'm done. But you want to just make sure that you're keeping your trimming consistent as you go around. So let me show you something. So where this block was a little funky monkey, when I trimmed, I did not take my stabilizer away because I'm going to press that open because I want to have the same amount of seam width. So I'd rather have it just be stabilizer than nothing. So if you do run into that and you're using the same method I am with the stabilizer, go ahead and just leave that in there. That would be my recommendation to you. But trim this down. This is, again, block 7. We'll see you guys back for block 8. Happy sewing, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.